Hey everyone, Xerath here, and today we have another build guide for you. This one is going to be for the Sorcery tree primary. We're going to be delving into what you can take for secondary as well as the minor runes. And this is going to be the second build guide that we're going to put out. The first one was for inspiration. We're not going to do one for domination, as I just don't really think any of the primary runes for domination, like anything like Dark Harvest or anything like that, is actually good on Xerath. So we'll be stopping at these for now, and we'll probably do another video maybe about Blackfire Torch to head into tomorrow. So yeah, let's just get started with this. So basically, you're obviously going to be going Comet. If you're going Sorcery, just the best rune to take there, right? And mainly you're going this for more dominance. To compare the two builds, you're kind of trading a little bit of early game acceleration to getting your first item, as well as potential, late game gold generation. You're trading that for more lane specific domination. So it's interesting because the new first strike kind of interacts a little weird. Before, people thought of it much more of as like a late game scaling option, but now it's actually kind of like more of an accelerant option to get your first item. But you could sort of view this build as sort of an accelerant in the sense of it's more lane dominant. That's how I would describe it. As first strike is trying to get to your first item quicker and has a little bit more of late game, helps you scale a little bit into the late game, right? Whereas this is going to be more just hyper focused on lane dominance, right? And neither of them are terrible at the other thing, I would say. I think that this build performs better in the game post laning phase, though, than the first strike build performs in lane. So the first strike build definitely struggles a lot more in lane, and that's a big advantage to this build, is that it really excels in lane, and then the post laning phase, it's not like it's terrible, right? It's just that you're not quite as maybe accelerated as you would be with the first strike build, and it lets you get a lot of basically, I would say this build lets you keep people honest in lane and allows you to kind of like do enough damage to them to really get you through the lane. And in some cases, you can even create kills for your team and stuff like that via the extra damage. But really, I think it's more just about not being completely bullied. They have to respect you more because you just do more damage, right? So let's get into that. So the first rune we encounter, I didn't really bother to list that bracket here because we're just going to go Mana Flow Band. It's pretty much non-negotiable. I personally don't like playing without a mana rune, but in this particular case, you could go without a mana rune in the other builds when you're going first strike, right? Potentially, but there's no reason not to take the mana rune here because it's just the best in class in that row. So we always go Mana Flow Band there. Now, the second column, basically, we have, or row, we have Absolute Focus and Transcendence. So between these, I think I tend to go with Absolute Focus. We'll kind of like cover them both, right? So Absolute Focus is nice because you're going to be above 70% health a majority of the time, right? And it's just a way to get extra AP on in a situation like support, for example, where you don't have a ton of access to AP, right? You're trying to kind of scrounge together any possible way to get additional AP that you can, and this is certainly not a bad way to do that. Transcendence is definitely nice as well. I think it's mostly for the ult, though. I don't really tend to have a problem with Xerath's other cooldowns. Like, you're not really going to be... I feel like the stun is not something where you're going to be looking to stun people at every opportunity that it's up. It's more like you're going to try and be using it in the right situations, and most of the time it's going to be up when you need it. As far as the Q goes, the cooldown reduction on Q is very non-noticeable because it's already kind of like a low cooldown, and then you still have to take the time to aim it and stuff like that, right? So it's not an ability that you can just, like, in some sense you want to be getting out as many as you can, but it's not an ability that you're able to like actually rapid fire in a sense. You still take some diligence, and even when you reduce the cooldown a bit, because the cooldown is already so low, it's not super noticeable. So either option there I think is fine, but I tend to side with absolute focus there. Then going down into the next row, we have Scorch versus Gathering Storm. So I think when you're playing Comet, you have a bit more flexibility here. The reason why I really like to take Scorch on the First Strike build is because you do so little damage in lane that this really kind of helps keep people honest, like what I was saying before. You just want people to not be able to disrespect you in lane. You don't want them to be able to eat all your damage, sit there, spam, taunt you, not that that really matters, but the idea is that, you're not a threat to them, right? So you're kind of always in danger, and they're never in danger. Like, you don't want that. You want to be able to hit them consistently enough and hard enough that they feel some type of pressure, and they feel like if they do step out of line in the lane, they're going to get punished heavily. So Comet allows you to do that much more aggressively, which means that you don't necessarily feel the need to go into Scorch. However, I do like the idea of stacking Scorch, and most of the time when I play the sorcery tree with Comet, I do take Scorch because it's just like I'm doubling down and leaning into that complete lane domination, right? The complete and utter lane terrorization and harassment, basically. Another thing too is Xerath is primarily a poke champion, right? And a lot of your damage is going to come from shooting off single Qs, and what that kind of means when you look at these two runes of Scorch and Gathering Storm, you'll notice something that at 30 minutes, right, which is already kind of rare that the game is, I'd say, decided at 30 minutes. Like, your games might trickle into the 30-minute territory, but usually they're over by then, I would say, or at least mine are. But even if you do make it there, you get plus 48 AP, right, which seems pretty good. And on the surface, it's like, well, that's way better than Scorch, right, where you're at that point, you're probably encroaching around like 30 something damage in like the low 30s, maybe mid 30s damage. But the thing about that is that when you look at it on just the Q, like if you're poking people, the damage there from Scorch is even quite similar because the 48 AP has to filter through the, I believe, 0.85 AP ratio on Xerath's Q. So you're already losing some of that AP in terms of raw damage off the top there. And then that makes it kind of like equivalent, right? And if you're just comparing the Q, the damage on the Q, those are both going to be very similar. So for poke, you're not really losing much by going Scorch over Gathering Storm, even into the late game, to be honest. Unless, obviously you get to like 40 minutes or something. If your game goes really long, then obviously, you start to lose more and more. But until you get to really that 40-minute mark, you're not really losing much in terms of just poke, which is the primary job of this champion, in my opinion. A lot of your gameplay is going to be hovering around, queuing people, softening them up. Where the Gathering Storm really does separate itself from Scorch, and this happens even earlier at the 20-minute mark, is with the ultimate. Obviously, you have more charges, and the charges actually scale with AP per per burst hit, so you definitely can see the difference on the ultimate with Gathering Storm at that 30 minute mark. So a lot of people say Gathering Storm starts to outscale at 20 minutes, and I'd say that overall the assessment is correct in the sense that they're counting the AP being used in all the abilities, which is fair. But if you're just thinking about from a poke scenario, which you are going to be doing a lot, Scorch doesn't really get gapped that hard. So it's just something to consider. I feel like this one is, it could definitely be up to you thinking, like, is the game going to go late or not? That's a consideration you have to make. I feel like games just don't go very late, unfortunately, nowadays. So it's, like I said, it's really rare I'm getting to that 30-minute mark, and I feel like I still have an effect on the game. It's usually we've either won or lost by that point. So that's another reason why I tend to go to Scorch. It's just like the lane domination is there, and then the fact that I'm not really accessing what I feel to be the full benefit of Gathering Storm in a usual game case, right? But I don't think either one of those is wrong explicitly, just situationally different, right? So that's pretty much the sorcery tree. And then we'll talk about the various pairings. So we have all three pairings on the board here, and that's because since you already have a mana rune, I think it's going like into the domination tree secondary is more viable on a sorcery primary tree than it would be on like a inspiration primary tree, right? So presence of mind. We'll just start with precision first. And presence of mind is really strong. It's actually very strong combined with the mana flow band. And actually, like when I have both of these in lane, I feel really strong. I think that the first build I'm gonna try out for sorcery is gonna be Comet, obviously, mana flow band, absolute focus, scorch, and then we're going to go presence of mind and cut down. And the idea is going to be basically that we're just like a complete terrorist in lane, right? We are going to just have a bunch of mana. You really do feel the mana difference having both of those. You still can't completely ability vomit, but you have a lot more. You can use your abilities a lot more liberally. We'll say that, or a lot much more liberally. So I definitely like having both of those. And then cut down actually provides kind of like some nice late game assurance sort of damage there, right? And you can always sub in Gathering Storm if you want even more late game assurance or damage in the place of Scorch, right? And you'll still have a fairly strong laning phase. So yeah, I think that that could be like a really strong build. And if you do opt into the more late game version of that setup, when you have Absolute Focus and Gathering Storm together, and then you pair that with Cut Down, it does kind of make up, I think, for some of the gold that you're losing for not going First Strike, right? In terms of like what you would have been able to buy AP wise, right? Especially if you make it to like 30 minutes, you're talking about at this point probably like close to like 70 something AP and then 8% more damage. Like that's nothing to scoff at all, clearly, right? I guess you could also take Cut Down as the First Strike inspiration build though as well, so something to keep in mind there. But yeah, I think in terms of the secondary rune for precision, you always go Cut Down. My thoughts on this is just that you're going to be way more often attacking people that are higher health than lower health. You're going to be starting fights. You're going to be poking people down in the mid. And basically, when people get too low, they tend to retreat. Right? So you're not really going to be sitting there farming tons of damage on like low health targets with coup de grace. And I think in some ways people really like coup de grace because they think, well, yeah, but I want that impactful damage. Like it's more impactful when they're low. And I think while that intuitively kind of makes sense, the reasoning there is a little bit fallacious, right? Because the problem is a lot of times you don't really know when the damage you're doing is contributing until it actually happens, right? So if I chunk a tank out to, let's say, like 75% or even 85%, it may not seem like a lot, but then he goes into the fight, and if he dies, and he wouldn't have died with that 15% HP, that he would have had if I hadn't been chunking him down, then we contributed there, you know what I mean? So a lot of times people tend to only view things as like a success if they got the kill or they see their damage like directly led to a kill, like they did a bunch of damage at the end of a target's life cycle. But doing a bunch of damage from the beginning and chipping them down sometimes causes the opponent to avoid fights altogether, and other times, makes it just way, way easier for your team to get in there and finish people off. So something to keep in mind, like don't underestimate damage at the, poke damage you can be doing before the fight even starts. and cut down really helps doing that type of damage. It's really, really good at softening people up. So yeah, those are the two I would keep in mind from the precision tree. Now, going into the inspiration tree secondary. So this is what I used to do before when I used to play sorcery primary. I'd either do the presence of mind cut down, like I said, but that became a little bit awkward. It won't be as awkward anymore thanks to the cut down changes. But if I wasn't doing that, I would do the inspiration secondary. And before, it was very clear cut what you would do. You would do magical footwear, and you would do futures market, right? Because futures market was just so crazy. You got crazy acceleration. It basically, what I would, how I would describe it is, it was kind of like taking the lane dominance of the Comet build, right? And you're keeping that because you're going Comet and you're going Scorch, but then you're also pairing it with the major strengths of the First Strike build. And really, the only time, like, I would still play First Strike a lot of games just because I feel like I have an ability to drag the game late a lot of times, so that tends to benefit me. But you would really only notice the First Strike kind of later on in the game at that point, right? Because in terms of the early game, you still kind of had the same things that you'd have in the First Strike build. In other words, the main thing that was getting you to your first item first, or quickly, were magical boots and futures market, right? And you would still have those in the inspiration tree for that the Comet build, essentially, right? If you went that secondary. So you weren't really losing actually that much, and I think that was a very underrated build. Unfortunately, we lost futures market, so it's really a question of what are we going to take in its place. We can't take cashback if we go magical footwear, because they're the same tier, and I would submit that I just think that's magical footwear is going to be better in most cases, unless the game goes super late, obviously. So it's really about jack of all trades versus triple tonic, and I'm honestly kind of on the fence about this one. Part of me wants to lean into jack of all trades, and part of me is sort of wondering how jack of all trades transcendence would be. In some ways, stacking more ability haste, obviously, you get less effect from it. However, the build that I typically tend to go, remember, which is Luden's Companion, Liandry's into Void Staff, doesn't really have a lot of innate ability haste, right? So we cover some of the ability haste that are missing there, and that's kind of really going to be more evident on the ultimate, more than anything else. But I don't really know that I'm thinking it's going to be enough to make a huge, huge difference. And I think the problem is since we're not really unlocking the second tier of Adaptive Force, it tends to not really be quite as strong as we'd want it to be. In terms of triple tonic, it is like very nice and useful. I do feel like the kind of like the peak capacity of it, or the peak strength of it, though, is from like level 9 to like 11 or 12ish, though, because once you do max out your W, I feel like having the extra level in your E is always nice, and you will likely finish the game without maxing your E, so you'll always get value from triple tonic in some way. Not to mention, you do have the 40 gold from it as well, right? But the extra damage on the E is, a lot of cases, not super, super impactful. I feel like it's not the thing that's kind of like really the differentiator in fights, right? The real big spike, in my opinion, is when you get the extra level in the W, but that only lasts for kind of like a few levels, you could think of it as, right? The elixir at level 6 is kind of interesting because when you have Scorch and you have the elixir going, you have some absolute focus levels at that point, right? And then you have Comet. You're starting to kind of get a lot of damage at that like level 6 thing, and you're honestly very potent at a dragon fight, I think, or something like that, even with the First Strike build taking triple tonic, right? Let alone a sorcery build that's taking Comet. So when you have Comet and all those other things and then you add on triple tonic on top of it, the extra ability power at that level, and you have the ult, right? So you get the ability power on each alt charge. It can be pretty potent, honestly. So I think I might actually lean towards something like Magical Footwear Triple Tonic, and I'd be trying that a bit, and then maybe I would also experiment with Jack of all trades. If you do find yourself in a situation where the enemy team is super squishy, right, you can always go the squishy annihilator build, right, where you don't build Leandries and you build Void Staff. So you build Luden's Void Staff into Storm Surge, and that will get you the 10 stacks of the 10 Jack stacks, which will allow you to generate the 25 Adaptive Force. And I think at that point, it's actually quite worth it to take the rune. You're getting like a lot of value out of it for sure, right? Because from the moment you have those components, like there's no more scaling or anything like that. Like it's not like a scaling rune, you just get the 25 adaptive. So I think that could be really strong for sure in that particular case. But I think the situations where you're going to want to do that overall are a bit rare, right? So that's why I'm kind of holding my breath on that combination. And yeah, so going into the final secondary pairing, we have Domination. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Ultimate Hunter here because this is the elephant in the room, right? A lot of people like this rune, and I am just not a big fan of it. As I've talked about in the other video, I think this is more of a win more thing. It tends to be, right? Because the more success you're having in the game, right, the easier it is to accrue stacks, right? So you're probably winning anyway when you have a lot of stacks. And in a lot of cases, if you're losing heavily, it can be hard to get stacks. Now, like I said in that video too, though, obviously Xerath is at least one of the better champions at getting stacks in a losing game because of the ultimate, right? Because of the range. You have a lot of ways to contribute on targets who are going to be dying and taking damage, right? It's not quite the same as like something like Karthus where you can like hit their top laner, like literally from being in bottom lane, but it's about as close as you're going to get, like reasonably to that, right? So I definitely don't think it's bad, but it's just not my favorite. Also, depending on how much other ability haste you have, for example, like if you take Transcendence or something, and especially if you go like a build that's more ability haste heavy, like if you go Horizon Focus into Crypt Bloom, I feel like the extra ability haste on this just kind of gets neutered, right? Because when you start adding in all that ability haste together, you're just losing a lot of value from it. If anything, I feel like this does perform kind of best on my Void Staff Leandry's build, right? Because there's not a lot of inherent ability haste. This kind of makes up for not having it. But the issue, again, is like, do you have it when you need it? Are you getting it early? Are you able to get the stacks early? Those things are all kind of like question marks, right? But still, it's not like a terrible pick whatsoever. I think the staple thing that I would do here, like the most solid option out of all the domination talents, is Ghost Poro. So this is like my anchor that I'll have. Well, I'll usually always take this. I like having the extra kind of vision out on the map, as well as it's very easy to stack this and stack it early. So you get the 30 AP very quickly. And I really like having that. So that's usually one of my anchor points, so I'll usually always have that. The cheap shot thing is kind of interesting. So normally I'm not a fan of something where you need to put a slow on and then hit them. But Xerath's combo is like particularly easy to hit in lane. And because we're doing kind of like a very lane-focused build, I think that makes cheap shot kind of strong, right? So it's just another source of additional damage on top of everything else. And it's definitely something I'm going to experiment with and try. And I think that it's mostly contingent on, is it going to be safe? Are you safe enough in lane to use this combo? So for example, if you're going against like maybe like a Thresh or something like that, right, where you have to be really careful about your positioning, maybe it's more difficult to get the full utilization out of something like this, right? But if you're playing against like an enchanter or something, and you have the range advantage and it's really sure, and there's not like any type of gotcha hook or flash hook type thing you have to worry about, then, or flash flay, then I feel like something like this becomes a lot more viable, and you can kind of pump a lot of extra damage out, and it only has a 4-second cooldown, which is really nice. So yeah, I'm definitely going to be trying that, and I think in terms of what I would pair with it, I would probably pair either Ghost Poro or Treasure Hunter, and Treasure Hunter will be kind of like the last thing we talk about here. So Treasure Hunter is like not a terrible option in my opinion. It kind of your odds of getting the stacks are basically the same as with Ultimate Hunter. It's just a little bit of a different function. The thing is, when I think about taking Treasure Hunter in my mind, I'm oftentimes just thinking, well, why would I not just take like magical footwear, right? Because you're gonna get more gold worth of Treasure Hunter, but you're likely not gonna get it as quick as you would with like the magical footwear, right? Like, it's unlikely that by the 12 minutes or 10 minutes or whenever you get your boots, you're gonna have all your Treasure Hunter stacks, right? And a lot of times acceleration is a big thing in this game. When can you get your items? When can you hit your spikes? And I feel like magical footwear helps you hit that more consistently than you would with Treasure Hunter. However, sometimes what I have seen people do with Treasure Hunter is, if they like the cheap shot harass type of thing, they basically take this as like a way to offset not having magical footwear. So they view this as like, well, I will eventually get my my equivalents, and I'll get even a little bit more than I would with magical footwear, right? And then I'm also still getting that lane dominance, right, that I would have otherwise. So I think that this is a reasonable option. It's not necessarily something that I would go for explicitly, but if I am going to go into domination for a specific reason, like I'm going to go cheap shot, then I think it would be between this or Ghost Poro, honestly. Yeah, I think I really would be torn between those two, and it would kind of depend on what I'm trying to do that game exactly. But I think I would ultimately probably go cheap shot Ghost Poro is what I'm leaning towards. But I don't think you're wrong for going Treasure Hunter. Just kind of like a little bit of a different take on the situation. You're not wrong for going Ultimate Hunter either. I mean, there definitely will be situations where, you get your ult back at a really opportune time because of that. It's just how common are they going to be? Not really sure, right? So just to kind of like go back through with some popular pairings, I really like Absolute Focus to Scorch or Absolute Focus and Gathering Storm. Presence of Mind and Cut Down is going to be the primary one there. I really like Magical Footwear and Triple Tonic for the inspiration. And then again, if you're leaning into that squishy killer build, where you're going to have all the stats to activate Jack of all Trades, then Magical Footwear Jack of all Trades could be very interesting. And that build again is Void Staff, Loon's Companion, and Storm Surge. And when you combine that with your boots and your support item, you'll hit 10 stacks. And then for the last pairing, I really like Cheap Shot and Ghost Poro, or Cheap Shot and Treasure Hunter. But feel free, if you're an Ultimate Hunter person, you really need Ultimate Hunter in your build, then I think this is definitely the primary rune set that you want to pair it with, right? You want to pair it with sorcery and not inspiration primary, because if you pair it with inspiration primary, then you're not going to have any mana regen. So if you're really into Ultimate Hunter, definitely go Sorc primary and pick it up, and I would recommend probably like Ghost Poro with it, or Cheap Shot. Either one works really well, depending on what you're trying to do and what you're trying to focus on. So yeah, that's my kind of rune breakdown for patch 14.10. I hope you guys learned something. If you like this, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you guys so much. Really excited to get into game tomorrow and test some of this stuff out. And until then, Xerath out.